an architecture media podcast supported by the Australian Institute of Architects, produced on Boonwurrung country.
Welcome to Design Speaks Weekly, a podcast that explores the biggest stories in Australian architecture and design. I'm your host, Georgia Burks, and today, Katelin Butler, editorial director at Architecture Media, speaks with architect Angelo Candalepas. They unpack the civic responsibility of cultural buildings and question whether architecture shapes who we are or vice versa. But first, here's the latest news headlines from Architecture AU.
In the news this week, 50 projects have been recognised at the Australian Institute of Architects 2026 New South Wales Regional Architecture Awards. The programme's highest honour, the Regional Medallion, was awarded to Austin McFarland for the First Steps Count Child and Community Centre. In Victoria, a group of built environment professionals has issued an open letter urging Housing Minister Harriet Shing to halt the demolition of 44 public housing towers slated for redevelopment in Melbourne. The group says the state government hasn't released the evidence needed to justify the decision. And in Western Australia, a development application has been lodged to adaptively reuse 3 commercial buildings within Perth's St Martin's Centre. The plans include converting St Martin's Tower, once the state's tallest building, into a 243-room hotel designed by Woods Bagot. Those are the headlines for this week. For the full stories and more news, visit architectureau.com. I'm Adair Winder. It's Tuesday, February 17.
Angelo Candalepas is one of Australia's most influential architects working today. Since founding his multi-award-winning practice, Candalepas Associates, in 1999, he has made a significant contribution to the civic fabric of Australian cities. In this episode, Katelin Butler, editorial director at Architecture Media, speaks with Angelo about the delicacies of designing cultural buildings and how architecture can embody the aspirations of a city.
Well, Angelo, welcome to Design Speaks Weekly.
How are you, Caitlin?
I'm great. Great to have you here. Now, Angelo, you've often spoken about architecture as a legacy for future generations. That idea seems especially powerful in your cultural and religious work, and you're currently working on some high-profile projects of this nature, such as the Fox, NGV Contemporary, and a new addition to Sydney's St Mary's Cathedral. I'd like to ask you how you navigate the balance between creative ambition and civic responsibility with such cultural and social significance.
Well, it's interesting that you think there's a balance between two polars there, because I think they're one and the same. Creative ambition is civic responsibility. And when we create things in our cities, what we ought to be doing is trying very hard to generate a constancy of interest in the city by every citizen. Not a currency, but a constancy. And by that I mean that when we have a new building, whilst we know that everything that we build transforms a certain place, it needs to continuously transform that place by causing for further needs around that building. For instance, if you have something such as a cathedral built, it generates its own needs around itself, and that's intergenerational. So the sense of creative force that comes with what we do as architects is embedded in the aspirations that one should have for a city.
That's a beautiful answer. And I think that leads me to my next question, which is the fact that Australia has a really deep First Nations history and layered multicultural identity. As an Australian architect with Greek heritage, how do you approach designing for cultures and communities beyond your own, particularly when working on projects with strong cultural or religious meaning? And then secondly, how do you navigate the tension between reflecting cultural values and helping define them through your architecture?
Well, the first thing I need to say about that is suddenly people regard me as part of the mainstream, which I'd never experienced until more recent years.
The mainstream, in what sense?
the mainstream of the population. I mean, I don't feel that I'm any longer someone that isn't part of society. And I didn't feel that way when I was younger at school. I always felt that I was someone apart from society, having had parents who couldn't really speak English, or they couldn't do so very well. And the duality of the culture that I existed in had something to do with very different ways of being to those ways that I experienced at school or with friends. But I find it intriguing that people see the Indigenous community as something apart from other communities. And I find that offends me, actually, because for me, what we should do when we engage with people that are of the land, of the place, we really should listen more and not ask too much of them other than to tell us what their story is. I mean, in Greek, it's very easy to understand this because there's no difference between the words story and history. There actually is only one word, and it describes both. Mm-hmm. And the sense is always that the story is more important than the history, because the story has an overlay that is cultural. That's in the Greek tradition. When we come to an English tradition, you can see that they kind of borrowed everything from Greece and Rome and others. So we've landed ourselves in a disassociation between that which is history and that which is the story of people. And so we think those two are separate. But for me, it's not. So the best thing of my work is to find inroads to an understanding of the mind of those people who are Indigenous and seeing actually how that can be relevant in the work.
And what about, I guess, that could translate to other cultures and communities that you work with? For example, religious communities?
Well, a translation means you change the meaning of something. So what I think is it doesn't translate. It is the method of communicating that has to be intrinsic in what we do. And communicating is important because the most important thing we do is not what we want. It's a strange thing to say, but
tell me what you mean by that.
Well, the most important thing an architect can contribute to a society is its needs. So it's interesting, at university we're so often taught about what would you like to do here, what is your concept, and is there a narrative? All of those things are a waste of time, in my opinion. What we should be doing is asking, what are the needs of this project? What are the needs of the people? Why am I here as the vessel to create something that is meaningful for society and everyone? And actually, what I want has to come last, if at all.
Well, that leads me nicely to the next question, which is that, Australian cities continue to densify and change, but what qualities do you believe architecture must embody to positively shape who we are or who we become as a society?
Well, that's a very clear answer for me. Civic qualities. The sense of purpose of a city and how a citizen is offered prompts on their behaviour. So what's interesting about what we do as architects, if we observe well enough, is that we cause certain behaviour in people. For instance, if we're in a black room like this all day, that elicits a certain behaviour in us, which is through time quite negative. If, however, we present something that is a courtyard or a civic place, a piazza, or an element within that, a loggia, or we create something that gives people something to do, then I think we're presenting an opportunity for people to behave in a certain way. And it's always got to be good behaviour if you're an architect, because you don't really want society to behave poorly. So creating kind of dark lanes that aren't very hospitable, where people can hide or are unsafe for people, is not a very good thing to do as an architect. But creating spaces where there's consensus that the space is there for the enjoyment of many, then that's a good thing to do for an architect. I mean, these are basic concepts, but these are the sort of things that I think preoccupy my mind about the duties that we have. I mean, we have a responsibility to cities as architects. We're not just creative in a sense, we're designing. We're not artists. There has to be a usefulness to it. And I think that's in many ways more difficult than art because it has to work and work in a way which has to do with all sorts of measure of things, such as insurability and all the things that make us reasonably responsible in society. But at the same time, we should engender that purpose in an optimism for the things, how we see ourselves. How do we see ourselves in society? And it should be always optimistic. It shouldn't be negative. I mean, there's so many things that can be negative in the world, and we should avoid them.
So I guess you're saying that, behaviour shapes the spaces as opposed to aesthetics, or, I guess that's kind of the difference between art and architecture perhaps. There are responsibilities to society with architecture. And that, in recent years, there's been a real noticeable shift away from the pursuit of the iconic building in architectural practice. And this, I guess, seems particularly challenging for cultural institutions which help define a city's identity, in terms of its aesthetics, and there's a visual kind of representation there. Do you agree with this shift away from that iconic building? And what role do you think the architectural icon should play today?
Well, icons are a Greek idea. They are the things that represent an enormous amount of depth in a summary. For instance, the icons on your computer are not the thing in and of themselves. They are a representation of something deeper. So perhaps in my understanding of what an icon is, I think we still need them. But in the secular, more broader understanding of what an icon is, it's interesting that icons usually come from geniuses. And one thing I don't think we need any more of is geniuses. I mean, I think we just don't need any more. There's been enough. They've caused enough.
Do you mean the genius architect?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, what's the point of having a genius architect? What we need is people that can make things work beautifully. And as Glenn Murcutt says, ordinary things beautifully. My sense is that if you just wake up in the morning and you have certain values about offering something positive, offering something good, and offering something beautiful to society, then maybe that becomes iconic. But it takes a long time for people to have that type of icon revealed to them. And that's my thing. I'm more interested in the slowness of the revelation of something beautiful rather than the immediacy of it.
Yeah, so you're sort of saying that something can become iconic over time rather than by intention. You're not necessarily intending to design an icon, but it happens over time.
Even Utzon was not intending to create an icon, I'm certain of it. I think what he was intending to do was just something that was representative of his thoughts at the time. If you intend to create something of an icon, then surely you will fail.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually.
Yeah.
Because there's that kind of level of expectation.
Expectation kills architecture. And you can see it in people that get so anxious about their own homes. If you're asked to do a home, there's a kind of expectation that you do something. I mean, there are words that are repulsive, like a term I really am repulsed from is the wow factor. Where's the wow factor? You just wonder what people want.
This is from clients asking you for the wow factor?
I don't have these sorts of clients, but there are people in the street, or if you're on a jury, you're sitting with colleagues on a jury, they're saying we need to see more wow factor. My sense is that actually the best thing to do is a plan that works, and if it doesn't work, it fails. And there's a point where it works and there's a point where it fails. And if a plan simply can't work, we as architects should be able to distinguish that and say, well, that plan shouldn't be in a city. If a plan works, then we should say, well, that has the DNA to be able to be something wonderful. And I'm absolutely assured by the concept that the simple plans always work and the complex plans are just there for the selfish needs of that person who drew whatever it is on the page. And I just don't think we should be that selfish to want something to be in the world. We should seek, research, understand. We should be poets examining the world, thinking about how it is, and then presenting it back to how we believe it should be. And we've got that vision to be able to imagine something wonderful, or we should. And it isn't what we can predict without the client, without the communion we have with wonderful people that engage us.
Yeah, I think that describes beautifully the value of the architect and what value architecture brings. So to conclude this episode, I'm going to ask you a question that we ask all our guests, and that is, has there been a recent experience or project that's caused you to rethink one of your long-held assumptions?
I was on the plane to get here this morning, and I was thinking of Cole Madigan, who was my mentor. And often people say that the passage of time causes the pain of grief to subside. And for me, that's the opposite. I'm going to get emotional now.
He was a dear friend and mentor of yours? Yep. Yeah.
And I'm placed in a precarious position where I advise the National Gallery from time to time. And without him, I find it impossible. And it's interesting, when someone passes, whether they're 100 years old or 10, every single one of us occupies a space upon this earth that can never be replaced. And if you think of all of the stars in the universe and however many people that have been on this earth, the entirety of people on this earth don't match the number of stars. I mean, we're talking about possibly through the whole of the history of known civilization, 10 billion people. It's not that many, really. And every single one of them on this little flying planet of ours has a space which cannot be repeated. Now, that's kind of interesting to me.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to end this episode. Angelo Candalepas, thank you so much for sharing your thinking so generously with us today.
Thank you for having me. It's a privilege to be here with you, Katelin.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode, which is supported by the Australian Institute of Architects. If you're enjoying this podcast, be sure to subscribe, share, or leave a rating. I'm Georgia Burks, and this has been Design Speaks Weekly. Design Speaks Weekly is produced on Boonwurrung country. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters, and culture.